There is a lot to discuss. I think, should we just start with Cursor? Because it's right in front of us. The focus of this morning was, Elon Musk has been quite honest about XAI's need to catch up in coding vis-a-vis Anthropic, OpenAI. What I'm trying to understand is like what this means for the models themselves. Do you have a sort of thesis on that?
Yeah, look, I've said this publicly, but I think about SpaceX as there's 5 layers of the company or business. Layer 1 is launch. This is foundational. It's kind of the future of the company. Layer 2 is connectivity, which is in its early stages with Starlink and direct-to-cell, but kind of proven, and I think the compounding is pretty easy to underwrite. Layer 3 is compute, which today is Terrestrial, and in the future will be Orbital as well. I think that the Google and Anthropic deals kind of show that is very likely to work. And I actually want to spend more time on terrestrial compute later because I think it's a very, very exciting and underappreciated part of the company today. Layer 4 is the model layer. I think that's where, probably rightfully so, most investors don't know how to assess where SpaceX AI is today. And so I think we should talk about that more, and that's where Cursor fits in. And then layer 5 is all the other bets. It's things that people today don't even know how to think about it. That's Terrafab, that's a moon base someday that has a railgun launching, orbital satellites in space. But look, on the Cursor deal, I think people are underappreciating just how good that team is, and also how well they work with Elon and the company.
Our last guest called it an acqui-hire. It's a $60 billion acqui-hire.
I don't think when a company has a $3 billion plus run rate is the reported number in, is a 3-year-old company. I don't think it's only an acqui-hire, but I do think that this is one of the best teams that's ever been assembled in the Cursor team. And I also think they've proven over the last few months that they can keep pace with Elon. Like, it is, unless you've seen it, it is impossible to explain the intensity and work ethic of Elon. And Michael and the team have kind of shown that they can keep pace and fit into this much broader ecosystem, adding value, on Terrafab, planning their orbital satellites, model layer, cleaning up data to train models, helping plan infrastructure for the future. It's just like, it is such a strong team that can go all the way to the bare metal in terms of understanding everything needed to build a model of the future. And so no, it is not an acqui-hire, but I cannot stress how good that team is. And for me personally, it makes me much more optimistic that SpaceX AI will win, or at least be one of the winning players on the model layer.
You're someone that's embedded in the teams. When I say embedded, I mean you're able to go in, work with the team, see what they're working on across SpaceX, XAI, X. And when I said that you were coming on the show, that was pretty much one of the questions that we got for you is, how do you think Elon Musk takes that Cursor team and integrates it and moves quickly? There's a particular Musk way of doing things, but this has happened 3 days since an IPO. It's pretty fast.
Look, I think there was a couple months, I don't know what the right technical word is, and I'm on live TV and there's a recent IPO, but I think there was a roughly 2-month trial period, and I think that only 1% or less entrepreneurs could survive that trial period of working very closely with.
You mean like Cursor passed the test?
Yeah,
basically.
I think Cursor passed the test, showing that they can keep pace, that they can operate without making mistakes, that they can actually elevate what's already one of the most talented teams in the world. And so I don't view this as like 3 days after IPO, there's something that came out of nowhere. I view this as there was many months leading up to that 2-month period, and then 2 months of like deep partnership. And so I personally think the probability that this is an accretive acquisition is like 99.999% because the trial was so intense.
Shaun, before we get to the NeoCloud business, I think that's like really important and timely. We're in day 3 of trading as a public company, and a lot of people will make a lot of the milestone of being worth more than Amazon. Maybe that happens at the close, maybe it doesn't. And I'm guessing you'll tell me that you'll distribute to the LPs when the time comes, and you expect them to hold the shares. What is your kind of longer term position on SpaceX?
I mean, look, for me on a personal level, and I say this as someone, I think I understand this business very well, like better than most investors, better than almost any investor. I am personally going to hold my shares in this company forever. Like, quite literally. I think that, and sure, there are some things that could change politically or, in the macro 10 years from now. But this is the biggest vision, the biggest mission of any company in history, going after the biggest markets of any company in history with the biggest moat. And so I just think the compounding is going to be, like, it's hard for people to even imagine the compounding.
Which part is the moat, Shaun? Sorry to interrupt you, but of the 5-layer cake that you've outlined, which one?
So obviously, great question. By far, the biggest moat is launch, which, we call people rocket scientists for a reason, or at least in the past, that was an expression. Like, the engineering that has gone into building Starship, I believe it's the hardest, like, single engineering project that any company has ever done. I think to me, it's meaningfully beyond, like, ASML, like, intrinsic complexity of building EUV machine. I'm happy to go into this. So I would say moat number one is the launch business, which is just so far ahead of everyone else. Moat number two, and for what it's worth, I think there's this kind of weird thing where I do think that people right now are really underestimating the terrestrial compute.
So let's go there.
Well,
renting capacity out.
Yeah, I'll go there in 1 second. And I think that the moat for terrestrial compute is not launch. It's the quality of the team that's been assembled, and in kind of this very heavy distillation process over 20 years of just bringing in the most talented people from Stanford, from MIT, et cetera, and only 1% or 0.1% actually survive this distillation process where they prove that they can work with the level of intensity while simultaneously the level of team orientation without making mistakes, et cetera. So that team has figured out how to solve basically every hardware problem in the world. And when you apply them to something like terrestrial data centers, they're building data centers faster and better than anyone else. And so the team is a second moat that I know that seems like, you can just go create a team. No, you cannot, because it took 20 plus years of distillation. But I think that we're in this weird metastable period where when we go 5 years from now, I think that launch will again be the moat, because I think that orbital compute will be dominating net new inference compute, like just absolutely dominating. But I think for the next 5 years, like, the team feeds into dominating terrestrial compute. So now you want to go to the terrestrial compute?
So the state of play is this. The XAI team, SpaceX AI, build data center quickly, and I think your argument is that on a dollar per token basis, highly competitively operate them. If you go on to a map of Tennessee, they have Colossus 1, Colossus 2, and Colossus 3. And a big question a lot of people had was, well, hold on. It's amazing to get $2 billion per month from Anthropic and Google, but why is that capacity not being used to train the latest, greatest models at the model layer or run inference on what Grok's already doing? Seemed like a blinder of a business decision, but longer term, like, it's hard to reconcile.
This is my personal opinion, kind of my assessment of the situation. First of all, one, the way I think that SpaceX, in terms of terrestrial compute, like, and you mentioned Amazon. Amazon and Microsoft are incredible businesses. I have massive respect for those founders, for the businesses, for Satya running Microsoft. But a lot of their market cap comes from their cloud businesses, and also for their legacy businesses in the case of delivery or the whole Microsoft Office bundle and operating system. But a lot of it is their cloud businesses. We're in a generational transition of cloud from kind of legacy CPU-based jobs to AI cloud. I strongly believe that SpaceX AI is the best in the world at building this next generation of AI clouds. like not even close. An order of magnitude better at building terrestrial compute in this AI era than anyone else. And it's not to say that the other companies are bad. It's to say you have the best rocket scientists in the world are now using their skills to build terrestrial compute. And what that leads to, in my opinion, is I think people are really underestimating how much more compute is going to come online next year and the year after for SpaceX. And that means I really believe SpaceX is going to have a surplus of compute. And I think it's very rational. And as an investor, I love that they are offering compute to Anthropic and Google because, one, it brings in a ton of revenue that I think in an IPO shows the world that all of this CapEx build out is not for nothing. And it's not all or nothing based on the model layer. There's this massive value that the company has a dial of how they choose what to do with it. Kind of next point, I think that people are underestimating that most of that compute is kind of Colossus 1, which is roughly 10 miles away from Colossus 2 and Colossus 3. It's heterogeneous GPUs.
In the prospectus, the team is saying at SpaceX as early as 2028. In a moment, we're going to bring up a Bloomberg rendering of the design and that's actually the SpaceX one, right? I think you're probably in the camp of people that think they can do this quickly. Where do you stand on your data orbital data center outlook for SpaceX?
I stand incredibly bullish, just incredibly bullish.
Shock, yeah. I'm not surprised by that, yeah.
But like I think it's rationally bullish. I think something that a lot of people are struggling with here is most people just never thought about what is a satellite, how do you build a satellite, what are the components of a satellite, what are the constraints around launching these satellites, and I think that people that have been following Starlink closely are very well positioned to assess.
Because you can extrapolate out on both the economics but also the engineering and physics.
Exactly. The orbital compute satellites are very similar in many, many ways to Starlink satellites. Like, I truly believe, and Elon said this last week in a video on orbital compute, that the intrinsic complexity of making a Starlink satellite is probably a little bit greater than an orbital compute satellite. So I know this sounds kind of crazy, but Starlink is on the satellites themselves. Starlink satellites are more complicated than orbital compute satellites. That said, orbital compute satellites are bigger. For them to make sense, they have to be much bigger. You basically want to put a whole server rack in space. Just in terms of doing inference on a model, you kind of need a minimum size for it to be useful. And you can't launch these bigger satellites unless you have Starship. So almost all of the difficulty of orbital compute satellites is in Starship. It's in the launch vehicle. And so if you want to estimate when orbital compute is going to be scaling, it's really a question around like when is Starship going to be scaling?
We're showing the videos. This is file, right, of Starship, and the basics of it are that on paper, 135, 150 metric tons payload to orbit, and I think there's some idea that in the future, in iterations, 400 metric tons.
I think the company said 200 metric tons is pretty achievable. 400 metric tons, maybe, I don't know. It seems likely, but I don't know. You just make it. There's something with rockets where the taller you make it, kind of the easier things become. The surface area to volume ratio, and that benefits you with drag. So it seems very likely, but manufacturing at that scale is harder.
Can you compare and contrast that? And so you outlined in great detail why you're bullish on the terrestrial data center neocloud business. Yeah. Where does the orbital data center business compare over just a reasonable timeline for you?
Yeah. Again, and I love the question. I appreciate the question. I think people are looking at orbital compute and they think, oh wow, this sounds so crazy, and I wasn't thinking about it 2 years ago. So it must take a long time. And a lot of Elon's timelines in the past have been wrong, which he says himself. But if you look at what an orbital compute satellite is, it's basically some compute element, whether that's a GPU or a TPU or Trainium or proprietary.
He said
chip.
They'd have reference designs for all of them.
Yeah, but there's the compute, and you want about a server rack's amount of compute. There are solar panels, like that's easy, fully kind of proven. SpaceX has huge experience building solar panels. And the third main piece are radiators. So this is what takes all the heat from the compute chips and radiates it into space via black body radiation. Those are the three main things. And then you also have laser links to connect to other satellites or connect to the ground, and radio to connect to the ground. Of these things, every individual component here is kind of fully proven by SpaceX, except for the compute side. But that is it's just not that hard. And so the satellites themselves are pretty easy to make.
That's a rendering again, a Bloomberg rendering of what you're describing.
Yeah. So to me, it really is a question of when Starship is flying. I don't understand why SpaceX wouldn't be able to have an orbital compute satellite up within 6 months or so of the first Starship payload flight.
We have 90 seconds left in the show. I can't believe it. We need to address the OpenAI and Anthropic elephant in the room, which is on paper, they are very similar. If you read the prospectus and the TAM that SpaceX outlines, is there room on Earth and outside of the Earth for all three?
I think intelligence is the most important. It's the defining capability of our time, and I think there's unlimited demand for intelligence. I think it's very clear that SpaceX will be, in my opinion, the dominant provider of compute for intelligence. And I don't know what's going to happen on the model layer, but there's absolutely space for all of these companies to succeed.
15 seconds. If you had like a kind of black swan memo right now for the firm Sequoia, what would the headline be? What's the biggest focus for you?
I think it's probably regulatory risk.
Okay, let's leave it as a cliffhanger, and you're always welcome here back on the show.